Welcome to MySecurityTV and our Tech and Sec Weekly. My name's Chris Cubbage. I'm the Executive Editor with MySecurity Media. And today we're going to be joined by Michelle Price, the Chief Executive Officer with AustCyber. And it's coming to the close of end of day 2 with Cyber Week, AustCyber's CyberWeek 2021. So we're going to be doing a wrap up on the first couple of days and then also having a look at the hypothetical that AustCyber ran yesterday at the end of day 1. Looks like a very interesting session. We've just posted on the Australian Cybersecurity magazine an article on that particular session. Just before I bring Michelle on, let me just run through what we've been doing. And if you happen to be listening, let us know where you're listening from. And otherwise, we cover off on aerospace and space, defence and national security, cybersecurity and critical technology, and cities and infrastructure. And we should be streaming live on LinkedIn, YouTube and Facebook. And after our little glitch there at the start, hopefully everything is going fine. And I'll check in a moment. But otherwise, on the chats, let us know if you happen to be tuning in. And also, if you happen to be tuning into AustCyber and the Australian Cyber Week, and let us know what your thoughts are so far and what sessions are a highlight for you. Now, we've just released, I'm not trusting the system today. So we've just released our Australian Cybersecurity magazine, Preparing Australian Business for a Cyber Attack. That is our cover feature, and that does come from sessions that we've been running with AustCyber. There's about 3 articles in there to highlight from AustCyber Week as well. And again, a cast back to our first interview with Michelle just a couple of weeks ago. And so please check that out. And tickets $149, so you've only got a few days to go. But also this Friday is complimentary with AustCyber Week as well. So check it out. That's on the marketplace. And good on you. Thanks, Robert. And in fact, Robert Nobilo, he's in the magazine. So hence listening. Thanks, Robert. Good on you, mate. Now, we've also released this week a podcast with Jane Lowe, our Singapore correspondent. Very timely. So this is a week after Singapore's just released their Cybersecurity Strategy 2021 and their interview with Lim Tien Chin, who is the Director, Critical Infrastructure Division. Very interesting. And this particular podcast touches on OT, obviously, but also the scourge of ransomware. And this is something that we'll talk to Michelle Price about today as well, and very topical on terms of their hypothetical. Tomorrow, I'm looking we're going to cross to, she's in Germany, Eva Maria Elia with Lookout. This is also a good one if you happen to be a managed service provider or an MSSP, managed security service provider. This one is for you. And again, looking at the market opportunities as a channel partner in the zero trust approach. And then also this week, we've released an interview with Rhys Clare, who is with Motorola Solutions. And this is in lead up to this Thursday's session with Motorola, looking at, this is a deep dive into their actionable intelligence, safety and security reimagined ecosystem. So looking forward to that one as well. Also, I've got 4 more books of Lisa's to give away. And the first 2 to comment, Robert, you're in the running if you comment again, but if you let us know where you're listening from, you get a book gift pack. And then for those runner-ups, you'll also get a free book, and I'll get them out to you this week as well. So please let us know if that's of interest. And then also we are obviously highlighting Australian Cyber Week this week. Runs through to the end of this week, the 29th. Also coming up next month for November, the City Festival of Space. And I just wanted to highlight the sessions. This starts next week. On Monday, I'm running a panel on national space capabilities. That's been sponsored by Inmarsat, and we've got also Malcolm Davis, Andy Coronius with the CEO, he's the CEO of SmartSat CRC, and Dr. Catherine Grace from the Australian Space Industry Centre. And then on Wednesday next week, we're looking at AI and space robotics, and that is also with CSIRO, Navinda Kodaje, who we're welcoming back, and Dr. Benjamin Koba, who is with the space industries, and also Bilal Sheikh, who is with our MySecurity Media. He's our data scientist, and we've been working with Bilal. So looking forward to having him on the panel. And also on Friday next week, this is being moderated by Australian National University's Associate Professor of Practice Engineering, Catherine Ball, and that one's looking at next-gen space. So that's just a sort of a very brief sample. Almost in competing with AustCyber in terms of their Cyber Week, we've had to go for a full month in order to even come close. Also in November, the Australian Security Industry Association's Security Conference is on, so get your tickets there. And finally, thank you to our sponsor for MySecTV, Secure ID and RSA Business. Thank you to our host of sponsors that we're working with at the moment on the marketplace. And then also thank you to our marketplace partners. If any of these are of interest, let us know. Otherwise, that's it from us in our Cyber War series. If you want to support the channel, beautiful Robert, you've got yourself a book pack. Well done. And that's it from me. Let's bring on, without further ado, Michelle Price. Thank you. Michelle, welcome back.
G'day, Chris. Great to be back with you, and of course to be here with you during Cyber Week. Last time we spoke, it was just ahead of Cyber Week.
That's right. In fact, because we've been just as busy too, so you've done well to grab all of these speakers and the host of events that you've got going on. And in fact, AustCyberWeek is still going. So I think you're going to like 7 o'clock tonight, Eastern Standard Time. One thing we wanted to touch on was the hypothetical. So we'll dive into that very briefly, but maybe just over to you in terms of how is it all going. The team's working flat out. I won't say what time Olivia was emailing me last night, but it was pretty late. So you guys are working hard. How's it all going over there?
Yeah, really well. Thanks, Chris. Look, obviously Cyber Week is a feature of every year for Australians now. This is actually our 5th Cyber Week. So I feel like we're actually starting to really get our run, and you know we've got a pretty slick operation here. I mean, you can kind of see that you know our lighting's pretty good. You know, Tom, our production crew resident in AustCyber, and you know Olivia with the rest of the team. Look, it's going really well. We've had already, I think, around about 14 events, and you know we're sort of just getting going with the week. So it's been massive, and you know every event is really well attended. In fact, our speed networking session today on diversity and inclusion, we almost crashed that system with how many people were connecting with each other. So that's fantastic. Hundreds and hundreds of connections made through that event. But as you mentioned, yes, we did have our hypothetical yesterday, which was one of 3 flagship events that we had yesterday. It was kicked off actually, Chris, yesterday morning with our opening event with the newly anointed Minister for Science and Technology, who's also the Minister for Defence Industry in Australia, Melissa Price. We do have very similar sounding names, and we do get often in socials. But of course, Minister Price announced the next tranche of funding under the Cybersecurity Skills Partnership Innovation Fund, which round 2 is now open. Over $60 million. That's right. Just for this singular round. So round 2 of that. Applications close on the 6th of December, everyone, if you're interested in having a look at that. AustCyber certainly will be looking at it. We've got some fantastic ideas that we held over from round 1 that we'll be putting in for. And of course, this is incredibly important to be able to inject that sort of partnership arrangement between government and industry to really tackle the skills gap that we know that we have in cybersecurity. But actually, colleagues, you know, if we tackle it with cybersecurity because of that horizontal nature of cyber, we're going to be able to tackle it for the other emerging industries. If we think we've got shortages going on in cybersecurity, imagine what it's going to start to feel like for industries that are emerging like artificial intelligence and quantum technologies. It's going to get quite extreme and very competitive. So to have that announcement during Cyber Week to kick us off was actually setting a great tone. But yes, the hypothetical, it got a bit tense, Chris.
Well, I suppose there's about 100 things out of there. Now we're going to be limited for time. We'll go for about half an hour with that. But maybe just touch on the partnership program and that innovation fund, if we can, just before the hypothetical. It was 60 million high. I had to read it twice. Is that part of the program, or is that? Do you think that there's a bit of a boost there? What was your initial thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the way that that's actually worked is that there was 2 rounds of funding that were announced as part of the funding package for the 2020 cybersecurity strategy of the federal government. But then as part of this year's federal budget, the government put more money into it. And so overall, it was initially supposed to be around about a $48 million program. And in the first round, the government spent $8.4 million of that. But then in addition to with the federal budget money coming into play on top of what was already announced last year, this round 2 is sitting at well over $60 million. In fact, it's actually pretty close to $70 million. Now, that has to be matched by industry. So my understanding is that, of course, the grants can be put in for, the applications are for between $250,000 and $3 million, but that then has to be matched by industry. So, of course, if you're going for the upper end of the money, it means a total project value of $6 million. So if we think about that as an injection into the economy, what we're going to see is close to $140 million just out of this round.
Yeah.
Going into innovative approaches on how we can solve the skills challenges that we have in cybersecurity. And as I said, if we're getting it right in cyber, that's going to have a multiplier effect across a lot of industries in the country. If we think about all of the cyber skills that are needed in every role of every organisation in the economy, that $140 million is so critical right now. And in fact, it actually starts to feel like it's a little bit of a small amount of money, but we'll still absolutely put to good use, I'm sure, that $140 million. So that's where that $60 odd million came from. Like I said, it's over $60 million from two parts being put together to make for a whopper of a round of grant funding. We don't normally see that amount of money coming through for cybersecurity in Australia, but the government's certainly raising the stakes, which is great.
I liked it, and as you say, there's the other sectors as well that are coming through. We talked about space briefly, but you can see, that brings in the robotics, it brings in aerospace and the drone technology as well. So there's a lot going on there in the advanced manufacturing. All of this really comes back to the hypothetical as well, because we're dealing with advanced technologies, integrated systems, and cybersecurity will always be at the heart of all of this. Now, the hypothetical started on a Sunday morning at a hospital was the scenario. Maybe just talk us through it, and then we'll walk through the outcomes. But yeah, just the hypothetical scenario that you were dealing with initially.
Yeah, sure. So, and I would like to say actually here, audience, that we didn't let our panelists know the detail of the scenario that I took them through. So yes, they knew the left and right of arc. They knew that it was going to be a cyber attack through a ransomware on a major hospital in Sydney, so that they could kind of visualize in their minds what this was going to start to feel like. But we certainly gave them no detail around how it was going to unfold. And so the way that it worked was I set out the context, and the context being that it was a Sunday and that, people were sort of enjoying their weekend, including in the hospital, families visiting their loved ones in the hospital, and how things actually started to unfold. And that was, of course, centered on just a regular routine ward of the hospital where patients were recovering from operations. And we had a person who is in their day job a CISO coming to visit a family friend, noticing, as a CISO would, that a whole bunch of nurses and doctors at the nurses' station were all sort of grouped around a set of computer screens, and then walked past and saw that fateful screen then come across. And then we sort of learned, of course, as things unfolded, that the hospital was under attack. And how it escalated was, in essence, how the organisation at the management and senior leadership level, we very quickly got to the board level, where we learned that, of course, actually the hospital lost its CISO 6 months earlier. They hadn't replaced the CISO. The IT director was in charge of everything. The IT director was found pretty quickly to not have the skills that were needed to deal with this kind of a situation. And the CEO makes the decision to actually get rid of the IT director in the middle of all of this and bring in an outside expert to be able to try and convince them whether or not at the board level they should pay the ransom or not. And the time was ticking. And we get to the stage where actually the board is completely just divided around whether or not the ransom should be paid or not. They're screaming and yelling at each other. The government's trying to reach in and help, and the ACSC is getting blocked by the CEO, and the media's all starting to camp outside the hospital, and patients are going bananas about, trying to figure out what the heck's going on, because they're all being asked to take photos of their records so that they can try and have some kind of paper backup system. And then we throw in over the top of that, firstly, 90% of the hospital isn't trained in their crisis management system to use a paper backup system. The PM then decides to call in the military to kind of get the calm happening again. It was all over the shop with the chaos. And in amongst all of this, the key thread, of course, was whether or not to pay the ransom and what kinds of architectures are needed from a people point of view. But then also, what should we do if there's no backups available? But if there are backups available, to be able to reinstate the system isn't the reinstated system the one that caused the attack in the first place? So we deliberately made it quite complex. And because the panelists didn't know what we were going to be asking of them as we stepped through it, we actually did get to a couple of moments within the way that the event ran where we had two panelists not able to answer questions because it was just so tough and so pressurised.
Without identifying them, what were those key questions that they couldn't answer? It might be a good outcome for those listening.
Yeah, so one of the questions was, okay, so in amongst all of this, how do we actually communicate to the rest of the hospital staff that we are actually okay, that, you know, as much as, yes, it is a dire situation, we need them to stay in their jobs on site, being able to manage the sort of the crisis that's going on from a patient care perspective, as well as the emotionality of the patients themselves, but also the families and the friends that are trying to find out what's going on. So that was one issue, like sort of and how does the CEO then walk out the front of the building and speak to the cameras that are then being shoved in front of his or her face? That was one question that really wasn't being able, just, you know, I wouldn't know what to do in that situation. You know, how would you take into account everything that's going on in that moment and reassure the public that, you know, you don't, the public doesn't need to lose trust in the hospital, that anything you are going to say in that moment could cause all sorts of legal actions against you from all parts of the hospital community. The other one was around, at the end of the day, you know, do we pay the ransom or not if there are lives at stake? And the panelists were actually divided on that. You know, some were, of course, saying, no, absolutely not. But others were like, hang on a sec. If it is the difference between life or death in that moment, would you really not pay?
And the amount was 100,000 Bitcoin. Maybe could you just go over what impact it was having on the hospital? Obviously, it started with nurses looking at their computer screens going, okay, the system's not working for me. How extensive did you make the hospital? Was it completely offline and systems not working, or just glitches along the way?
Yeah, so we ended up that by the time we got to late on Sunday night, the entire system was offline. So
Right.
it was a bit of a domino kind of effect, and that was to partly demonstrate that even though hospitals are famous for having legacy systems in the OT environment, that actually what a lot of hospitals have been doing around the world, particularly in countries like Australia, because of COVID, and we did throw a bit of a COVID flavour in there as well, with, you know, COVID patients on ventilators having to be removed from the hospital and sent to other nearby hospitals,
Yep.
as well as the critical care patients, that actually a lot of hospitals have, at least in the patient interface environments, done a lot of upgrades. And so you then really do have the colliding of sort of cloud-based applications being provided in front of patients, but at the back end, particularly, of course, with the equipment and the machinery involved in hospitals, but also just even the physical security system of the buildings themselves are still in the OT environment.
Yeah.
And so the ransomware sort of absolutely was able to make its way through because of that IT, OT kind of nexus there to actually bring the entire hospital to its end from a digital point of view. So we got into about halfway through the 24-hour period where everything digital was completely offline.
Were you tempted to, well, you mentioned the PM, right? So were you tempted to take it further out? The other one, you had Jessica Hunter, who is I'm going to get her title right. She's from the Australian Cybersecurity, First Secretary, right?
That's
from the
right.
Australian Cybersecurity Centre. At what stage maybe did help arrive technically from the ACSC?
Well, so Jessica was contacted actually in the scenario by a friend who had heard about this situation unfolding, and the concerned friend wanting to make sure that because it was a Sunday, not necessarily understanding that, of course, the ACSC is online 24/7 and on guard 24/7, to check whether or not she had found out through official channels that this was unfolding, and she hadn't found out through official channels yet. And this was in part to kind of point out that a lot of people are afraid of contacting government for help. So as soon as she found out that this was actually unfolding and was able to verify that what she had been told was true, they mobilised immediately. But as I mentioned earlier, of course, the CEO was actually rejecting the government's help. And so what the ACSC, of course, does do in those kinds of situations, because that is actually a real life response, In the case of a hospital situation, they then start to work with the jurisdiction's government CISO, as well as the health authorities within that jurisdiction. So in this case, it was New South Wales. And tried to provide influence and help indirectly through those services that are already trusted by the hospital.
Yep.
And then eventually get to a stage where actually early the next day, the CEO figured out that really they did need to get help from the ACSC, and it came to the point where actually they had no choice anymore because the PM had initiated the country's emergency action plan and decided that the troops were needed to keep calm in a physical sense and to be able to sort of create the space for the ACSC and other agencies to do their work.
Now, you also had Chris Painter involved as well. So he provides a bit of a sort of an offshore perspective as well. How did it all go overall? I'll come back to the skills part in terms of that IT manager who got the sacked or put aside. But overall, how did you find that it went? Something we just talked about just coming on was these could be done on an ongoing basis, just to take organisations through based on the learning outcomes in terms of, how people took it, the scenario itself. How did you find it overwent? These are needed more and the outcomes were pretty clear?
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. Look, I think that one of the key takeaways for everyone in the audience, as well as those who were the panelists themselves, is that we deliberately chose a hospital environment because of how complex they are, but also because of the emotionality of everyone involved, that when you're under that amount of pressure, and it was extreme pressure we deliberately sort of put everybody under, the authenticity of our panelists was actually quite visceral. And so, the overall outcome there was that everyone learned. Everyone learned that absolutely we do need to practice. And even when you do the practice, there's still going to be moments within scenarios that will still put you under pressure. But for goodness sake, get your response plans documented. Make sure that you're doing the sort of testing of them regularly so that people, for at least the most amount of the situation that they're experiencing as possible, is on reasonable autopilot, that people do know what the roles and responsibilities are. And in the case of a ransomware attack, that the board in particular, alongside with the CEO and the senior leadership team, have a very strong understanding of what their thresholds are around whether or not they are going to pay, and have already figured out what the legalities are for themselves around paying. And of course, if you're an organisation that has never dealt with cryptocurrencies before, it's not saying that we'll all go out and sort of open up a wallet tomorrow, but, having an understanding around whether or not it's appropriate for you to have that thinking on standby and to practice that as well. When we are dealing with life and death situations, we all do know that if we haven't been through that before, we're unlikely to be able to predict within an inch of our lives how we'd respond. Yep. So let's make sure we get the rest of the stuff sorted out. That was definitely one of the takeaways. And you're right, Chris, we could be practicing this in a collaborative way. And I know that there has been sort of references made to this in the past, but I think we are starting to get to the stage as a nation where we can be doing this collectively more and more. And, there is a little bit of theatre to this to make it engaging and interesting for people to stick with it. But we actually also need to put that into reality and make sure that we are providing safe environments for people to make mistakes so that when it actually does happen, we're not making mistakes.
And it's that different perspective. I have an ongoing talk that I give is communication, cyber crisis communications 101. And it was interesting you raised communication was a key issue that came up. And any crisis, it doesn't matter what it is, communication will always be one of these learning outcomes, but never taken on. What were the skill sets, do you think, from the IT side that kind of highlighted that they weren't there, that were absent? Was it the technical side or the softer side?
It was actually both.
Okay.
It was actually both. And so what was happening on the softer side was that the CEO was getting incredibly frustrated with the IT director for not really having a handle on the situation from a sort of an incident management point of view, but also understanding exactly what was going on, sort of in a 10-minute by 10-minute kind of incremental way, to understand how the CEO, him or herself, could then be briefing the board to make a more informed choice around what decisions they needed to make. So there was a lot of frustration going on there. But then, of course, that spilled over into the technical side very quickly, because it became clear that the IT director just did not have the experience or competence to be able to understand what was needed of his or her team both inside the hospital, but also for any of their security and IT providers outside of the hospital, to be able to work together under pressure in a trusted way and in a sort of a seamless way to be able to support and actually shut down from the inside further damage from occurring. And so we did have, of course, in the scenario deliberately that, the CEO then fired the IT director. One of the panelists then turned around and said, actually, that was a bad call by the CEO, because even though the IT director isn't performing in the way that the situation needs him or her to perform, they actually have all of the corporate knowledge of how the systems do work and what they do and don't have in place. And so as much as they probably did need in that situation a cybersecurity expert to be able to coordinate things, that cybersecurity expert needed the expertise and knowledge of the IT director to be on standby and to be able to help and contribute. So that was a deliberate piece of the scenario that we went through, and it actually worked quite well in being able to pull that out without us, of course, like I said, telling any of our panelists what the questions were beforehand, and therefore me not knowing how they were going to answer.
Nice. I think it's always a good one to have that continuity. Those are those mistakes that you can introduce into a hypothetical so everyone remembers, because again, in any crisis, you want to have that continuity. Best not to sack anybody under the heat of battle. Always reassign them otherwise. That could be best. Now, the other one, you ran some poll questions. How much audience participation and sort of feedback you got from the audience along the way?
It was actually fantastic, Chris. The polls were, like, you could see that everyone that was dialed into the event were actually participating in the polls, and being able to watch from the back end, within the sort of 3 minutes that we were keeping the polls open, people were actually actively changing their answers as they were working through the information that they had to hand at the time in the different segments of the hypothetical as it unfolded. They were actually actively live changing their answers while the poll was open. So, to have a situation where one of the polls that we opened with was, would you pay a ransom? That was almost out of context with what the full scenario was. They only had a snippet of the opening parts of the scenario at that point. And, at that point, 85% said no, they would not pay a ransom. But 15% said yes. I sort of made the remark that, that's probably a bit reflective of the overall Australian risk aversion that we see around security. But of course, there was a bit of a flicker, but it didn't really drop much below about 70% in that particular poll. But then when we came to the end and we gave everybody the opportunity to be able to rethink based on the information that was then laid out in full, backups were found. So then there was the discussion about whether or not, we could then negotiate with the cyber criminals on reducing the ransom to not attack again. And so if you go down to 50,000 Bitcoin instead of 100,000, does it make it more palatable to pay? And we provided the audience with a no, maybe, or yes on paying the ransom. And we obviously introduced at this point the point that no lives were lost during this scenario, but what would happen if lives were at stake? And again, we saw so much yo-yoing, a lot of yo-yoing around people wanting to answer yes, no. There was a lot of hedging bets on maybe. We had about 40% of the audience that said maybe, 40% of the audience saying no, but of course 20% of the audience then saying yes. And the panelists were divided themselves around whether or not they would pay the ransom if lives were literally at stake.
I'd like to have this at a CEO board level, just a pure audience of CEOs and boards on the difference between people using common sense and what they might find as reasonable versus a business mind which says, hang on, the losses are much, much higher than 100 grand and we can hit it. So it's been one of those things we have covered off on ransomware a number of times now. We've also got the Australian ransomware plan at a federal level. Did that pop up at all along with that?
Well, it did for two reasons. One was because actually, wonderfully, we had Minister Andrews, the Minister for Home Affairs, actually provide the opening remarks to the hypothetical where she talked about the government's new action plan on ransomware and gave some depth around that, which I think was really helpful because obviously we've seen media articles, but to hear that from the government's mouth through a minister, I think was really helpful. And then, of course, Jessica Hunter did raise that a couple of times in her answers on the way through to be able to draw parallels between the scenario and the real world. So that was also very, very helpful. And I think it was a very practical way for the audience in particular to start to think about what the implications for day-to-day business are going to be with that ransomware action plan. And for your audience, Chris, if they haven't explored what that looks like yet, I strongly recommend it. It's only proposed legislation at the moment, so we've still got the opportunity to contribute into how that's going to shape up. But I think overall, there's a sense that we do need to have some form of regulation in this space. Now, of course, by putting a marker in the sand of businesses that have revenue of $10 million or more, does mean that, of course, from my perspective, that the ransomware criminals will start to focus on those that have less than $10 million turnover in a year. But it's great to be able to start somewhere and to start with the businesses that actually should really now be in a position where they're starting to up their cyber maturity and be able to role model that for those that are in the ecosystem and the economy that have turnover of less than $10 million, because it will come. The regulation will then soon affect them at some point. So I think the way the government's stepping that through is actually quite clever. So let's make sure that we all engage with that legislation and make sure that the regulation aspect of it works well with what else is going on in the regulatory landscape.
Great. And I just found Jessica's a correct title. I called her First Secretary. It's the First Assistant Director General at the ACSC. I know that they're very good on their titles. And also our piece by Andrew, our journalist, is covered off on the hypothetical hospital cyber attack highlights, cyber risks in healthcare. I've put the link out on YouTube and on Facebook, and I'll do so after the session on our LinkedIn as well. But look, well worth the read. You also had the CISO from BUPA is involved as well, and Chris Painter, President of the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise Foundation, was also involved. Now, this is, and also Matthew Nevin, CEO of Cybermerc.
Yes, and Cybermerc, of course, was our sponsor for that session, so it was great to have Matthew involved in that.
Great. Now, these sessions will be available on demand for those with tickets, I take it?
They are. And so if you do have a ticket, you have the ability to go into the Knowledge Library and see all of the sessions that have already unfolded as part of Cyber Week. And then, of course, true to AustCyber's form, in the future, we will release all of them to the open world post Cyber Week, but for a while after, so that those who did do the right thing and buy their ticket will still have exclusive access to that for a while longer. But you can also catch up at the moment if you are a ticket holder on all of the previous content that we've generated out of the past 4 Cyber Weeks as well. If you want to reminisce on what it's like to go on a trade delegation with AustCyber, there's some stuff in there. That's always a bit exciting, if not a bit remorseful, but houghly we'll be able to get back on planes soon enough to go on in-person delegations.
All right, and I've just thrown in the schedule of events on the link outs as well. Now, 2 other bits we wanted to cover off and was the micro-credentialing. Now, this is also in the Australian Cybersecurity magazine. We've got an article on this. And then also the Dragon's Den. Maybe talk us through micro-credentialing and what that session was on. Is that today, did I see? Was that yesterday?
It is today. It's on this afternoon. So make sure you dial in if you have a ticket. If you don't have a ticket, you can still buy one. Tickets don't close until 10 minutes before each of the major sessions that we've got during Cyber Week. The micro-credentialing actually is, so we're starting at 6 o'clock Australian Eastern Daylight Time. And what we're focusing on there is the role of universities, of TAFEs, of high schools, and that sort of formal system combined with private educators in the system as well in providing micro-credentials, not just for those that we hear all the time in terms of upskilling within our own industry, but how people coming into the industry with recognised prior learning, as it's known within the education system, can be able to use micro-credentials to quickly get up to speed on the cyberness that they might need to be able to jump into a cybersecurity job. We do absolutely believe, like so many others do, that micro-credentialing is one of the key sort of secrets to the success of our industry being able to continue to grow at the great rate of knots that it has over the past 4 to 5 years. And to be able to take advantage of all of the opportunities that we're seeing that post-COVID will give us, combined with what's coming down the pipeline around things like AUKUS and all of those good things. We know that as a result of COVID, of course, that the economy writ large is now much more cyber aware than what we were 2 years ago. So the demand for cyber skilled people in and out of our industry is going to grow like there's no tomorrow. So micro-credentialing is a really, really important element of the whole environment. having those pathways incrementally gap filled by the micro credentials is really important, and getting them from trusted places. And this is actually a front runner to a big announcement that we'll see come through in the landscape over the next couple of months in this space. So if you're not sure what micro-credentials are in cybersecurity and you want to understand which ones you can trust, please join us for that session at 6 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. If you're a ticket holder, of course, you'll be able to catch up on it later on. But we've got some of the country's best experts happening as part of that session talking about cybersecurity micro-credentialing.
Well, and that's really, does that take you to the Innovation Fund, the Partnership Innovation Fund as well? Do you think there's a lot of opportunities there in that space?
I really do, actually, Chris. And so if you want to get a bit of a hint or a tip on where the sort of gaps are that government might be looking to fill, absolutely jump into that session. You know, when we get to this level around micro-credentialing, the really great area to be focusing the conversation on is the different types of cyber security skills that do exist. If you're interested in that, of course, AustCyber does provide a dashboard of what the different competencies and skill sets are in the global cybersecurity industry. Jump onto AustCyber.com and go to the resources section to be able to see the nice dashboard. That's the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education that we've replicated in Australia from the US. And so being able to zero in on those particular competency groups and the packages of skills around those is where micro-credentials really have their home. Yep. And so we can see that there are gaps at the moment that we have in providers responding to those gaps. I think the SPIF fund is going to be a great way to fill those gaps.
SPIF fund, okay. I hadn't heard of that. Of course, it's called the SPIF fund. Now that one again, that's upskilling and micro-credentialing and remote workforce, 6 o'clock Australian Eastern Standard Daylight Saving Time. Now the other one is the Dragon's Den. This is on at 2 o'clock tomorrow. Now yes. You be the judge. So again, this is a pitch deck, right?
It is. It's our pitch event during Cyber Week. We always do have at least one. This year, we're dialing it up just a little bit. And absolutely, if you don't have a ticket to Cyber Week, this is absolutely the reason why you should. Because as part of your $149 ticket price, you actually get to have Cyberoo dollars come to you. And your Cyberoo dollars is what you will use during the Dragon's Den pitch event to invest in the 10 companies that are pitching. So you as the audience will get to use fake dollars to be able to show who you think real investors should be investing in. And of course, you should actually start thinking about if you do have a little bit of cash under the pillow from sitting at home in COVID times, there's some great companies that would love to have you as an angel investor. And this is a great way for you to test out your investing skills. We will also have judges who will give their informed views around what it is to invest in companies. And we've strongly encouraged all of our ecosystem of fantastic investors around the world to be in the audience. They get to practice their investment fake dollars to then turn around post-event and try and take out all of the angel investors and move in and invest in those 10 great companies that we've put together. It'll be a lot of fun, but there is a serious side to it. Of course, as we know, for those that do know AustCyber very well, we're very, very strong advocates for procurement in sovereign Australian cybersecurity capability. And all 10 companies are Australian-born companies that are providing fantastic world-leading products and services in cybersecurity. And so the Dragon's Den is all about letting people into the den, letting them know what the secrets to the success of any cybersecurity stack is all about, and being able to showcase what these companies have to offer with that little bit of fun element over the top as well.
I like it. And now that's on tomorrow. That's 2 o'clock. And again, you've got a full day of events. And then also you've got physical events. Is this one at Kangaroo Island, right? And then there's also Cyber West is also underway, I saw on socials. How many physical events have you got going on?
Do you know, actually, I haven't kept track of the numbers, Chris. It's nice. We've got so many, but we do have, I guess, the lion's share of the in-person events. It would not surprise any of the audience to learn that they're in jurisdictions that have not been in lockdown. Most of them are actually happening out of Western Australia and South Australia. And as you mentioned, Chris, we've actually got an in-person event being held on Kangaroo Island. Now, that's in part because Kangaroo Island, as an economy, a microeconomy that is still recovering from the bushfires almost 2 years ago, are using their recovery in part to be able to draw attention to careers in STEM. What better way to be able to showcase cyber as a career path in STEM careers? And so there will be a breakfast with teachers, students, educators, and a whole range of different employers happening on Kangaroo Island. But for us also at a national level, it's to be able to showcase the fact that cybersecurity really is needed everywhere, including Kangaroo Island. And of course, Cyberoo is a strong endorser of having a Cyber Week event on Kangaroo Island.
Good. And you got a couple of ones there. I just saw another one. You got Cyber for Schools on Kangaroo Island as well. And also maybe just to finish off, slightly off script, is the Maryland. Lost it there. Showcase Maryland, USA. What's that one?
Yeah, so this is on Thursday morning, again, Australian Eastern Daylight Time. Thursday morning, we're bringing together our colleagues from the state of Maryland in the US to be able to have a bit of an exchange around what it is to take great cyber companies out of the US. There's a big cluster of cyber companies that occur in Maryland. And for those that don't know why, it's because the government of Maryland absolutely saw cybersecurity about 15 years ago as being one of the up and coming industries that could make money and attract new business and innovation to the state. So they've got a great cluster of companies that are looking to export to Australia, but similarly vice versa. And the conditions economically, as well as from a legal point of view, for Australian companies to be able to land themselves in the US through Maryland, it's a great opportunity. And so, of course, they've got the Baltimore flip up, as it's known. Of course, we've got all of the different kinds of agencies as well as businesses that have engaged in that process being showcased through that event on Thursday morning. So this is our export element of Cyber Week's agenda, and being able to get people starting to prime up again for the world to physically move around, because we do know that as much as we can do a lot online, nothing beats trust being formed in person. So we'll warm you up by doing some stuff virtually so that we can get out ahead next year and start doing business with the world.
And I suppose just to finish off, RSA are supporting you as well. Is that going to be on 22? Do you have plans to go?
Oh, this is such a hot topic at the moment in the office, Chris, and around the industry, we're starting to have people ask each other if they're going to be going to San Francisco. So yes, we are doing an innovation showcase with our very good friends at RSA Conferences this week as part of Cyber Week on Friday morning. That's part of the free events that we've got happening on Friday. So an innovation showcase on cloud security. So please dial in for that, everyone. Details are on the Cyber Week website, so free to attend. But for RSA Conference San Francisco, that's running from the 7th to the 10th US time next year in February. And so, yes, what we've done this week as a result of so many people asking us if we're doing something, we're doing our sort of cautious thing first, and we're on the phone today actually to our insurance brokers to find out what has changed in our insurance policies. But do watch this space, colleagues. We are absolutely thinking through what we're going to do. So take it as a minimum that we're going to do something. We're just not sure yet what it's going to look like. And our good colleagues across at AusTrade are starting to talk with us as well. We do think that, of course, 2022 will be the year that the world opens up again. Whether or not February is just a little bit early for organisations and countries like us down in this part of the world, it might be a little bit too soon, but we'll do something.
And you mentioned insurance brokers. Something we didn't quite touch on with the the ransomware was the ransom brokers as well. We could have taken that off on a whole new, but that was another outcome just to finish off here, right? So there was an outcome on how if you are thinking about paying the ransom, even if you're going to say no, you've still got to say no. You need some sort of ransom broker there as well. So you need to have those other third parties in regardless to do that negotiation, and hence why, again, another takeaway, right? To close off.
That's right. And we actually... Yeah, just to close it off, there was a great discussion actually that happened around ransom brokers and whether or not you can trust them. And in the audience, we clearly had people from the insurance industry, because the questions that were coming through around the implications for your insurance premium if you do pay and you're using ransom brokers and all the complexity of it. There's lots of layers to this. So I guess the key message there is that, there are lots and lots of considerations and lots of kinds of things and entities that many of us have never dealt with before that you might actually have to start to contend with.
Well, it is as I mentioned at the time, a full circle from 2010 to 2014 period. You had the piracy in the Gulf of Aden and the Malacca Straits with piracy and paying ransom to pirates. kind of similar thing now, but now in a pure cyber context. So it's not new, just different things. But again, now we've got Bitcoin. We didn't have Bitcoin back then, and
No, we
probably a
didn't,
good
and we
thing
didn't have
too.
the pace of the internet.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and now you've got seconds to do it rather than maybe a few hours or a few days. So
That's right.
I think that puts it into good context as well in terms of scenarios that we're dealing with. So look, Michelle Price, we could literally keep going. I did say we might go for half an hour. We've gone for 45 minutes pretty easily. We've got some slight network issues at my end. I don't know if it's your end as well, but otherwise all seems fine. This edited version will go out very shortly after this session. Enjoy the rest of AustCyber Week. We're going to have you back on Friday as a week wrap-up around about 3:30 Sydney time. So look forward to that, and we'll have some other highlights from Australian Cyber Week. But well done to AustCyber for all the effort, and well done to the team. They're putting a lot of effort in the background.
They absolutely are. I've got the best team in the country, and don't any of you come after them. They're all mine. Thanks so much, Chris. And again, thanks for your support.
Good on you. Thanks, Michelle. I'll put you backstage. Michelle Price, CEO with AustCyber there. Pleasure. Thanks. Ciao. Tom, you can come and work with us if you like. There you go. So thanks to Michelle Price and the AustCyber team for AustCyber. Just tidy up there. Now, just to finish off for the day, I just wanted to we normally do a report of the week, and I mentioned the Singapore cybersecurity strategy. Now, this is a worth one having a look at if you're in this space. And in fact, I'm just going to blow this up for you to actually have a look. It's interesting to see how the Singapore Cybersecurity Agency, or CSA Singapore, is presenting their strategy 2021. I think the last one was 2018, so they're doing it on 3-year cycles. This one, just to focus on build resilient infrastructure. They've got to focus on critical information infrastructure at its core. Then they've got enable a safer cyber space, and that's looking at safeguarding cyberspace activities and empowering our cyber savvy population for a healthy digital way of life. And then the third key pier there is enhance international cyber cooperation. They then duck over to their strategic pillars, trusted and resilient cyberspace, and their foundational enablers, developing a vibrant cybersecurity ecosystem and growing a robust cyber talent pipeline. So again, it's well worth having a look at and getting a sense of how Singapore is approaching their cybersecurity and implementing their strategy. Obviously, Australia's cybersecurity strategy 2020 is in line with 1.67 billion over the next 10 years. But Singapore and Australia, I think, is well worth having a look. And thank you also to Jane Lowe, who interviewed the CSA, and we released her podcast this week as well. Just to close off with you, if you want to be in the next edition of our Cyber Risk Leaders magazine, which will be out in the next couple of weeks, welcome to get your articles in. I've still got 3 more books. Hang on, we've got a chat here. 3 more books, and thank you to Dr. Jazz. I can get you a book, Dr. Jazz, if you want, from Malaysia. It's great to see Professor Jazz with us. And if you want to get one last copy of Risk Starts and Ends with People with Lisa Sisson, let me know where you're listening from, and I'll get one of these out to you. And then finally, I want to see you on Thursday if you can. If you've got time, I know you've got time with AustCyber there, but also we've got a session with Motorola Solutions, Detect, Analyze, Communicate and Respond. We're going to be looking at the Motorola Solutions Safety Reimagined ecosystem, and that's looking at actioning intelligence across your enterprise and your infrastructure. So again, putting the smarts, I suppose, into your IT systems. As I mentioned, we'll have Michelle back on Friday afternoon, 3:30 Sydney time, to get a wrap up of Cyber Week 2021. And otherwise, that is it from us on our Tech and Sec Weekly, our Cybersecurity TV. Thank you very much for tuning in. And Dr. Jazz, you got yourself a free book pack. Well done. So thanks for listening. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you back on Friday live.